Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're still in James. We're a couple days into James at this point, and today we're going to be looking at James 1, verses 19 through 27. And the subject on this one is listening and doing. And so we'll look at this real quick and then look at our notes. James starts out James 1, verse 19 through 27 says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." This would help so many people in so many ways, including myself. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. So get rid of all filth and evil in your lives and humbly accept the word God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. But don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourself. For if you listen to the word and don't obey it, it is like glancing at your face in the mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law and it sets you free, that sets you free. And if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it. If you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. Um, that's a scary verse. We'll come back to that a little bit. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. We're gonna dive into that a little bit as well. And so in this section, James basically is talking about listening and doing, hearing the word and actually doing what the word says. Basically, it's the proof, and the proof is in the action, right? You can hear a lot of things, but are you actually doing what you're supposed to be doing? And so the focus of this section is on proper Christian conduct, especially regarding use of the tongue, because we're going to look at this, and we know this in personal experience, right? The tongue is a very powerful can be a very powerful hurtful thing if it's not used properly and in the right context. And so Proverbs has a lot to say about controlling the tongue to prevent outbursts of anger. You can just search those. There's a lot in Proverbs about controlling it along. But James here is reminding believers the virtue of being quick to listen, slow to speak, to avoid unrighteous anger. And this is something that we as a human society, especially this day and age of social media and everything else, right? I mean, we could all, whether you're Christian or not, we could all benefit from that because we are so quick to see something and just respond to it, judge it, have our say. Everyone's got everything to say about everything. Now, everyone's an expert in everything. We're all medical doctors. We're all experts in engineering. We're all everything, right? And so you see someone doing carpentry, and you're going to make sure you comment on that, right? And so it's just right. We just have this idea now that everyone's just an expert in everything. We know everything, and so we're just so quick to see something and say something, and but we don't take the time to slow down, actually pay attention, listen to what someone's saying, right? Hear what someone's saying, and then think about it, process it before you respond in anger. Or even if it is something that should make you angry, right? Or would make someone angry, if we would still just stop and listen and or stop and process everything, let ourselves cool down before we respond in anger, then man, it would just save a lot of issues, a lot of relationships, being destroyed, a lot of just really hard issues that come out of that if we do it. And I'm speaking to myself in this one because there's a lot of times where I don't take the time to just properly listen and stop. That anger builds up and you just want to respond immediately, and sometimes that filter in the head doesn't work. So we've got to make sure that we do this. Purposely stop and slow down. I mean, we just need to slow down in life in general, but stop, slow down, and listen and this. And so, one of the things that James makes an observance here, and I think an important thing, he makes an observance around what true religion, right? What true Christianity really looks like, and we need to, as a church, pay attention to this verse because I think it's important. I think it goes back to Judgment Day, right? When Jesus talks about Judgment Day in Matthew and what Judgment Day is going to look like. If you actually were to ask a lot of people, I think in Christendom today, what are you going to be judged on? And it's going to be like all these things that I did, that made me look good, or how many times I went to church and how much I gave, and and it's like, now, if you actually look at it, what Jesus talks about, it is not about all that kind of stuff. It's about how you treat other people. It's going to come down to how you treat other people. I mean, and we need to make sure we pay attention to that. And so he talks about the idea of, right. having someone look in a mirror, you look in a mirror and forget your own face. You turn around. So the person like refused to hold his tongue. It's like the same person who refuses to hold their tongue and is deceived about his faith, right? You come and it's like that's how worthless that type of religion is. How good is it? Is if you go and look in the mirror and you can't even remember what you look like 2 seconds as soon as you step away from it. And it's kind of that idea, you know, about how we see things, right? The hearer hears and talks, but he doesn't act on what he's heard. And that's the thing is we have a lot of, and I'm not saying this in general. This is like we've got studies that are proving this over and over and over again, and it's getting worse in the church, right? We have a lot of people who like to show up and hear the word, right? There's a lot of people who, I mean, I sat as a preacher's kid for 40 years, right? In a church building and listened to dad preach for 40 years. And there was a lot of people, including myself at times, right? Who liked to sit and hear what dad had to say, but they didn't want to do anything about it, right? They were there almost kind of like what this is what James is talking about. Honestly, they were there to check a box, say, hey, I did these things. I punched my Christian card on Sunday and I did all these things. And so now I'm good. And James is saying no. There's a whole lot more to Christianity. In fact, that's the bare minimum, right? That's the bare minimum. And so James goes in and says, hey, here's my idea of what pure and undefiled religion is, and it's based on action, right? Not hearing the word, not meaningless lip service, right? I'll I'm just going on our experience and a lot of things that we saw. It's like you would have a lot of people and I'm talking about in Christendom because this is who James is writing to. A lot of people would show up, they'd tell you how good your lesson was, they'd walk out the door, and you knew they weren't going to apply any of it. And I'm not saying that to be mean, right? You knew they were there to do that, to shake your hand and say, hey, that was an awesome lesson, but they weren't going to apply any of it. And so again, we've got to make sure that we're not, this isn't how we are, because what you had, I think even in James's time, was there's a lot of people who wanted to say they were Christians, but do they really want to do what's required, like the action that comes about them? We're going to talk about that, the work side of things, the things that prove this faith, the things that prove your Christianity. Are you really willing to do that, or is it just, hey, you know what, we've kind of brought Christianity down to the fact of, well, as long as you show up on Sunday, do your give the things, do the things right, then you're good. And we've got to get away from that type of Christianity. We have to, because that's not Christianity. That's more than of a social club type of thing than it is anything. And so in the first century, what he talks about orphans and widows, he hits on orphan and widows here, but I think there's a lot to it. They had very little means of economic support. And so this is why I tied this back to what Jesus says in Matthew. He says, basically what you had in a situation is, unless a family member was willing to care for them, right, they were reduced to begging, selling themselves as slaves, or starving. A lot of horrible things that they would have to do if no one was there to take care of them. And so when Jesus says, on Judgment Day, how is he going to base on how you, basically your entry into heaven? It's based on how you treated the poor. Did you take care of the homeless? Did you heal the sick? Right? Did you take care of those who were in prison? Those type of things. Those are the things that he lists as the criteria for getting into heaven. And so James kind of, I think, hits on this a little bit more when he uses the orphans and widows as an example, and says, hey, if you're not taking care of that, this is pure and undefiled religion, is taking care of these people. Wait a minute, I thought it would be, man, having really good worship services and singing the best songs and having them do this and giving having that perfect attendance check card. No, it's about what true Christianity looks like. It's about what you do after Sunday. It's the rest of the six other days of the week. That is what Christianity is about. Now, and I've said this before, Sunday is important. What we do on Sunday is important. Worshiping God's important. Those things are important. But how you are once you're out of there, that's more important. You want to truly worship God? Behave like Jesus. Act like Jesus. Try to get closer to Jesus by becoming more like Jesus. That's who we're called to be. That is what true Christianity looks like. And that's what James is saying here. And so By caring for these people, by doing these things, the church put God's word into practice. This was the thing that we should be focused on. That is what, that is what they were, and they were, and that's why they grew, right? They didn't have, we talk about, like, we look at a lot of churches today, it's like, oh, why is this church growing? It's like, oh, because they have all this and they have all these lights and they do all these things. And it's like, wait a minute, they didn't have the opportunity. The early church didn't have all that. They weren't able to have put on a good show. They weren't on a really awesome worship service, all that kind of stuff. They weren't. Most of them met in their homes. But what were they doing? They were putting God's word into practice more than anything. That was their main focus. And so they grew like crazy because people wanted to be a part of that. And if we were to get into that today and do that today, make that our primary focus, then man, we would grow in leaps and bounds, and the church would really spread out like it did back in the early church. And so when my last thought on this is when we give with no thought of receiving. This is the idea around this too, right? Is they gave without expecting something back, right? We show what it truly means to serve others, and that was what it was. They gave with no expectation of anything else. You know, and I think we need to do that. We need to say, hey, you know what? We see someone in need, we're going to give to them. We don't expect anything back. I don't even expect you to show up. We want you to show up. We're going to, but maybe we just help you whether you show up or not, whether you're ever going to show up or not. But we still continue to take care of those who are in need, continue to help those people who really need help out. And that's what James says true religion, true Christianity actually looks like is that, because you have a lot of people who say a lot of things and talk about a lot of things. Let me put it that way. And but he says this is not the case. And there's one other verse I didn't put notes on this, and there's one other thing that he says, if 26, right? And I didn't put a lot of notes in here on this, but he says, if you claim to be religious but can't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. We need to pay attention to that. One of the worst things, the worst thing I've ever seen in a church, and in multiple churches, right, is people not able to control their tongues, whether it's talking bad about people, gossiping, all that kind of stuff. And this right here, the tongue, and the tongue, I have seen the person's tongue destroy a church over and over again, right? Because they couldn't control it, right? And then they also couldn't control their anger and some other things, right? And so these are the type of things that we need to be very, very careful, because not only can it destroy people's lives, it can destroy people's reputations, right? Once you say something about someone and it gets out there, you can't take that back, right? And so those are the type of things you have to be very, very careful with. That's, I think, also, if we go back to that, that's why James is telling us to slow down, quick to listen, slow to speak, because we say things that we don't know what we're talking about a lot of times. Or we hear something and we get angry about it without really understanding it, or we don't seek to understand. We don't seek, we hear something and we don't actually go and find out if it's true or not. We just accept it as truth because one person said it, and then we don't actually go to the person that it's about. And so there's a lot of this tongue. This isn't just like lashing out in anger. There's a lot of this is gossip and that kind of stuff as well, that we need to learn to control the tongue around this kind of stuff, because this kind of stuff, man, James knows, and I've seen it firsthand. I've had it happen to me firsthand, right? That this kind of stuff can destroy people's lives. It can destroy churches. It can destroy all kinds of things because people just don't control their tongue. Simple. I won't say it's simple. Sometimes it's very hard, but it's a simple thought, and such a small thing can destroy so much. It's a very small tool, but it can destroy so much. But it can also do a lot of good, and that's what I hope you see what James was talking about here as we go into this. So, as always, I really hope this is helpful. I hope you're learning from this. There's so much we can go through in James. There's so much we could dive into. Honestly, could probably do like a half hour, 45-minute long videos on each one of these sections, but not going to do that to you. But there's just a lot. And so I encourage you to read, encourage you to dive into this. If you have a study Bible, read the notes, go dive deeper into it, because there's some really good stuff in James, and it's a really important book of the Bible for us to learn from, and just on some really, really good things that help us in our everyday lives, but especially that help us as Christians. So as always, I really appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these. You just heard the announcement. I'm not going to re-record this video, that our washer is done. And so I appreciate it. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And again, thank you for watching.